It started with the way Boone arranged pebbles by shape. Then came the books, organized by color, then author, when Elliot found him staring at an unplugged TV, mimicking the weatherman's hand movements in silence. He knew this wasn't just intelligence. This was something else, something watching, remembering, waiting. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments and if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you? Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. Blue Ridge, North Carolina, late autumn, just after a cold front rolled through. The sky over Blue Ridge was a tapestry of heavy gray clouds, bruised with patches of fading light. A soft drizzle swept across the rolling hills, soaking the amber leaves clinging desperately to skeletal branches. The mountain air was sharp, the kind that whispered of winter not far behind, on the edge of town. Nestled between collapsing barns and shuttered antique stores, sat the old hollow auction barn, a structure that looked like it should have fallen in on itself decades ago, but somehow still stood with stubborn dignity. Inside, the air was thick with damp straw and rust, echoing with low murmurs and the occasional cough from men in weather-beaten jackets. Most were old-timers, farmers, hobby breeders, rural collectors, leaning against the wooden rails with mud-stained boots and eyes that had seen far too many bad harvests. In the corner of the barn, a pot-bellied stove gave off lazy heat that never quite reached the shadows. Elliot Harlow. 67 stood near the back, silent, arms folded across his chest. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and slightly hunched from decades of working with animals. His spine curved like a shepherd who had spent too many nights in stalls instead of beds. His face was leathery, deeply lined, with graying stubble and a nose slightly crooked from a mule kick years ago. His hair, once jet black, was now silver and unkempt beneath a brown felt hat. He wore a thick wool coat and jeans patched at the knees, the look of a man who no longer cared much for appearances. After his wife, Lillian, passed 3 winters ago, Elliot had withdrawn from the world. Once a respected large animal vet in Asheville, he sold his practice, retreated to the outskirts of Blue Ridge, and now only treated creatures others had given up on: limping deer, blind raccoons, dogs no one wanted. People whispered he was going soft in the head, but no one ever said it to his face. The auction was near its end. Most of the prized animals had already gone to their new homes. A few sturdy mares, a couple of show dogs, some aging ponies. That's when the double doors creaked open again, and a hush swept over the barn. 2 men walked in, dragging behind them something the room hadn't seen before: a gorilla. He was massive, easily over 400 pounds, with a sloping brow, long, powerful arms, and a coat of jet-black fur that had dulled into a brownish sheen from neglect. He moved sluggishly, chains wrapped around his wrists and ankles like he was a criminal instead of a creature. His name tag read only C9 Boone. Boone's eyes were what stopped Elliot mid-step. They were deep brown, expressive, and indescribably tired. Not feral, not wild, just distant, empty in a way that made your gut twist. The gorilla didn't roar or bang or resist. He sat down, slowly, at the center of the arena straw, slouched like an old man at a bus stop, waiting for something that wouldn't come. "Next lot," barked the auctioneer. Marvin Criggs, a balding man with an orange hunting vest and a voice like a broken kazoo, tapped the microphone. One male gorilla, unknown age, ex-circus stock, behaviorally calm, no documentation. "Let's start at $100. $100. Anyone?" Silence. Someone near the front laughed under their breath. A woman in a red flannel. Sarah Lang, a breeder known for her barrel-chested mastiffs, muttered. Ain't no one dumb enough to buy a broken ape. Sarah was a woman in her early 50s, tall and wiry, with sharp blue eyes and a permanent scowl etched onto her face. After a barn fire claimed half her kennels 6 years ago, she became harder, bitter even, speaking to animals more gently than she did to people. Boone shifted, lowering his head further, the chains clinking with each breath. He didn't look at anyone. Elliot cleared his throat. I'll take him. Heads turned. A few chuckles. Criggs blinked. You serious? Harlow. Don't make me say it twice. 100 to Elliot Harlow. Sold. Criggs slammed the gavel down like he couldn't believe it. As murmurs spread, Elliot made his way to the front, exchanged crumpled bills for a receipt, and looked Boone over, up close. He could smell the grime in the gorilla's fur, see the scars on his hands, calloused knuckles, one ear slightly torn. The animal looked like he had been through war and lost. An hour later, Elliot drove his weathered green Ford pickup down the winding road back to his property. Boone sat quietly in the makeshift cage in the truck bed, shielded by a tarp from the drizzling rain. The engine hummed low, windshield wipers thudding a slow rhythm. Back at the farm, the storm clouds hung low. The house, a small log cabin surrounded by cedar trees, sat quiet, framed by a rotting fence and rusted tools. Elliot parked near the barn and opened the truck gate. Boone didn't move. Elliot didn't push him. He simply stood in the drizzle until the gorilla stepped down on his own, shackles clinking. His movements were stiff, but not fearful, just resigned. Elliot led Boone inside an empty stall. He unfastened the chains, one by one, Boone never flinching. He watched Elliot with those hollow eyes, blinking slowly. It was when Elliot turned to fetch water that he noticed it. A faint mark on Boone's chest, obscured beneath matted fur and dirt. He moved closer, gently brushing it clean with a cloth, a tattoo, barely visible, a stylized H inside a circle. Highmore Institute of Biological Advancement. Elliot froze. He hadn't heard that name in nearly 15 years, but he remembered the headlines, strange experiments, lawsuits, missing animals. The institute had gone dark a decade ago after public protests, but rumors lingered. And here, standing in his barn, was proof something had survived. Elliot took a step back, heart thudding. Boone looked up at him, then sat down, folding his arms across his broad chest like a statue carved from grief and silence. Elliot whispered, "What the hell are you?" The morning air in Blue Ridge was crisp and dry, the mist from the day before having lifted to reveal a cold clarity. Dew clung to the fence posts and the overgrown grass outside the barn shimmered in the weak sunlight. Inside the barn, Elliot Harlow stood watching the creature he had brought home just 24 hours earlier. The gorilla, now named Boone, was seated calmly in the straw-covered stall, his back straight, arms resting on his knees, as if meditating. Elliot had chosen the name quietly that morning, almost instinctively. Boone. He had muttered over his coffee. Looking at the broad-shouldered silhouette in the stall, it was a strong name, worn and weathered like the mountains around them. A survivor's name. A name for something that had clearly lived through more than any animal should. Boone was nothing like the gorillas Elliot had treated years ago in traveling zoos or wildlife rescues. Those had been volatile, fearful, reactive. Boone, on the other hand, moved with eerie composure. He observed his surroundings rather than reacted to them. He didn't growl or beat his chest. He folded the blankets Elliot gave him with care. He inspected objects slowly, almost curiously, and most unsettling. He watched Elliot with a gaze that seemed too human. That afternoon, Elliot tested a theory. He walked into the barn with an old wooden box of paperbacks and scattered a few across the floor. Boone looked at them. Then, one by one, picked them up and began sorting them by size. Not by color, not by shape, by size. He stacked them in two neat piles and sat down beside them, his expression neutral. Later, when Elliot latched the stall door and left for the house, Boone waited until he was gone, reached through the bars, and slid the lock open. The sound of the metal catch clicking made Elliot freeze halfway across the yard. He turned slowly. Boone was sitting at the stall entrance, the door wide open behind him. He hadn't moved beyond it. He simply raised his eyes and met Elliot's with a calmness that said, "I'm not trying to escape." Elliot stood still for a long moment, then nodded once, quietly relatching the door. He didn't say a word. 100 feet beyond Elliot's pasture, on the other side of the rusted chain-link fence, sat a run-down white trailer, its aluminum siding pockmarked with dents and grime. The windows were permanently fogged with condensation and grease from the inside. Scattered in the overgrown lawn were a broken plastic sandbox, an old bicycle without a chain, and the remains of a charcoal grill long since rusted through. This was home to Jamie Brooks, age 11. He had a narrow face, freckles over his nose, and ash-blonde hair that fell unevenly across his forehead like it had been cut with kitchen scissors. Jamie was small for his age, often quiet, and more comfortable with stray animals than with other children. His clothes hung off him, too big, too many stains, and his sneakers had duct tape wrapped around one toe. Jamie's mother had died in a car crash when he was 8. Since then, his father, Roy Brooks, a construction worker who hadn't had steady work in years, spent most days passed out on the recliner with the TV on, beer cans scattered at his feet. Roy had been kind once. People said, but grief and unemployment had hollowed him out. Now, Jamie mostly kept to himself, drawing in his notebooks and talking to crows. That Tuesday afternoon, Jamie was crouched near the chain-link fence that separated their property from Elliot's. He was tracing patterns in the dirt with a stick, mumbling sound effects under his breath. When he caught sight of something large moving through the barn window, curiosity got the better of him. He crept forward, leaves crunching underfoot, when he reached the fence. He stood on tiptoe and peered through. What he saw made him freeze. A gorilla, real, huge, sitting in the open doorway of the barn, elbows on his knees, watching the field. Jamie blinked. He rubbed his eyes, half expecting it to vanish, but it didn't. The creature was still there, still staring, still calm. Jamie whispered, "Whoa." Boone didn't react. Then Jamie did something strange, something only a boy who had gone far too long without a friend would do. He waved Boone, slow and precise, lifted one hand and waved back. Jamie grinned. The next day, Jamie returned with a peanut butter sandwich in a sandwich bag. He placed it near the fence and backed away. Boone, watching from the barn, didn't move, but an hour later, when Jamie came back, the sandwich was gone. The plastic bag, oddly, was folded and tucked into the corner of the fence. This routine continued for several days. Jamie brought whatever he could sneak from home, an apple, a pencil, even a dog-eared comic book. Boone never crossed the fence, never approached aggressively, never made a sound. But he always accepted the gift, and Jamie, in return, began to talk to him. He talked about school, about how he hated math and loved outer space, He talked about his mother's voice, how she used to sing Country Roads in the car. He talked about his father, how he used to build him tree houses and now barely noticed if he was gone. Boone never interrupted, never looked away, just listened. One day, Jamie reached through the fence and left a small drawing, Boone's face, sketched in pencil, with big, kind eyes and a smile. Boone picked it up carefully and examined it for a long time. Then he placed it in the corner of his stall like it mattered. That night, Elliot found the drawing and stared at it in silence. He said nothing to Boone, just refilled his water bucket and left the barn without a word. But the next morning, Elliot put a second blanket in the stall and a book on sign language. By the time the maples began to flame orange along the ridge and the air thinned with the scent of dry leaves and distant smoke, Elliot Harlow's barn had settled into a rhythm that neither man nor beast expected. Each morning, Boone greeted him not with noise, but with presence, sometimes seated, sometimes already rearranging objects in his stall. He rarely vocalized, never showed aggression, and had become oddly fond of sorting wooden alphabet blocks by vowels and consonants. Elliot didn't ask why. He simply watched and wondered. The books on cognitive primates Elliot had dusted off from his veterinary shelves offered little in the way of real explanation. Boone was more than exceptional. He was impossible. One cold Thursday, a package arrived. The mail carrier, a lanky young woman named Brandy Dell, barely 22, with pink hair under a USPS cap and a permanent wad of gum in her cheek, hopped off the mail van and handed Elliot a large, padded envelope with no return address. Weird one, she muttered. No postage either. Someone must have driven it here. Elliot took it with a nod. Brandy was new to Blue Ridge, the kind of person the town would never quite trust. Too many tattoos, too little small talk, but she was polite and showed up even in snowstorms. Back inside, Elliot tore the envelope open. Inside were several old manila folders, yellowed with age and lined with faint mold stains. The papers were brittle but meticulously organized. His name was printed in sharp black ink on the front page. To Elliot Harlow, for when the past finds you, there was no letter, but he recognized the handwriting, tight, slanted, and almost too neat, Charles Rooker. Charlie had been a colleague during Elliot's early years at the Veterinary Institute. A soft-spoken man with silver-rimmed glasses and fingers always stained with ink. They had both worked peripherally with Highmore Institute before its mysterious shutdown a decade ago, while Elliot had left quietly. Charlie had tried to sound the alarm. A year later, he vanished from the public eye. The whispers said he'd been paid off. Elliot never believed it. Now the folder told a story. Boone, referred to in the documents as Subject K9B, had been part of an experimental cognitive enhancement program. The goal: to push great apes beyond the limits of known intelligence using neural stimulation, social isolation, and advanced sign language immersion. The documents noted early breakthroughs: tool replication, logic puzzles, self-recognition beyond mirrors, but then the tone shifted. One file detailed a fire, labeled only as an incident. Lab personnel were evacuated. Several subjects lost. No photos, no names, no follow-up. Boone's file was sealed. Elliot sat on the couch for hours. The folders spread out like a battlefield on the coffee table. He remembered the headlines vaguely: a small fire, no human injuries. Institute shuddered quietly. But this wasn't about flame. It was about hiding something, out in the barn. Boone was painting. Yes, painting. Elliot had given him an old box of finger paints from the attic as a curiosity. Boone had set up a row of canvases across the barn floor and, without guidance, had begun applying color in distinct patterns, spirals, shapes resembling eyes, the outline of a hand with 5 evenly spaced dots beneath it. He painted with deliberate control, wiping excess paint from his fingers onto a towel before switching colors. It was mesmerizing, and from the fence beyond the field. Jamie Brooks had been watching. Jamie had started visiting daily, slipping under the lowest rung of the fence and crouching in the weeds. He never crossed into the barn. Boone never invited him, but he watched, whispered to himself, and sometimes waved. That Thursday, though, he brought something else, a phone. The screen was cracked, the camera fuzzy. But it worked. Jamie crouched low and recorded Boone mid-paint stroke, his giant hand gliding across the canvas like it was writing a thought. That night, Jamie uploaded the 28-second clip to his personal YouTube channel. Jamie and the Crows, a neglected space filled mostly with time lapses of clouds and videos of raccoons stealing cat food. He didn't expect anyone to see it, but someone did. The video had just under 30 views when the first anonymous comment appeared. "You don't know what you have." Take it down, then another. "Is this from North Carolina?" And finally, "You're not safe." Jamie deleted the video in a panic, heart hammering, but it was too late. At 10:47 p.m., Elliot's landline rang. It hadn't rung in months. He picked it up cautiously. A man's voice, flat, emotionless, spoke only one sentence before hanging up. "Give us the animal, or you'll lose everything." Elliot stood frozen, the dial tone echoing in his ear. His stomach twisted. He turned slowly and looked out the kitchen window toward the barn. Boone's silhouette sat peacefully, unmoving, surrounded by drying canvases. The night air was dead quiet. Too quiet. A memory surfaced, Charlie Rooker once whispering at a conference dinner. "If something ever happens, don't trust silence, that's when they're closest." Elliot turned off the porch light and pulled the blackout shades for the first time in years. The sky over Blue Ridge darkened early that day, long before the sun slipped past the hills. Thick purple clouds swelled across the horizon, and the air tasted of coming rain. Elliot Harlow stood at the edge of his porch, a rusted pair of binoculars in hand, scanning the tree line beyond the pasture. His gut had been tight since last night's call. Something had shifted, like the world around his quiet farm was holding its breath. Boone, as always, seemed to sense it too. He hadn't touched the paints that morning, instead. He spent most of the day sitting near the open stall door, motionless, as if listening to something Elliot couldn't hear. His posture was rigid, and even his breathing seemed shallow. Jamie had come and gone quietly. The boy hadn't mentioned the video, nor the strange comments, but Elliot could see the fear in his eyes when he slipped a new drawing under the barn gate, this one of Boone standing between two tall shadows, all scribbled in black. By late afternoon, the rain had started, a fine drizzle that clung to your skin like sweat. Elliot had just returned from the tool shed when he heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. He turned. A black SUV rolled slowly down the driveway. Its headlights dimmed. It was too clean for a mountain road, too polished. When it came to a stop, 2 men stepped out. The taller one wore a charcoal suit, crisp and unwrinkled despite the damp. He had sandy hair slicked back and skin that hadn't seen the sun in years. His eyes were gray, calculating, cold. The shorter one was broader, thick-necked, with a buzz cut and shoulders like a linebacker. Both moved like men who were used to getting what they wanted. "Mr. Harlow?" the tall man asked. His voice was smooth, too smooth, like something practiced in a mirror. Elliot didn't answer. He simply rested one hand on the porch rail. where his old lever-action rifle leaned behind the post. "We're from the Department of Wildlife Relocation," the man continued. "There's been a clerical error. The primate in your possession was improperly released. We need to take him into containment." Elliot narrowed his eyes. "You got paperwork?" The short one stepped forward, producing a thin leather wallet and flipping it open. The ID inside looked real, laminated seal, black and white photo, barcode. But Elliot had worked too long in state services to miss the details. No expiration date, no agency address, no embossed seal. "You boys come from Highmore?" Elliot asked, low. Neither answered. "Well then," Elliot said, slowly straightening his back. "You're trespassing." The short one tensed, clearly ready to move, but the tall one raised a hand. "This can go easy. Mr. Harlow, you're old. You've had a quiet life. Let's not ruin it. I already buried the part of me that was scared of men like you." Elliot replied, "You're not taking him." The two stood silent for a long moment. Then they turned and got back into the SUV. No argument, no threats, just a slow reverse down the gravel road until the woods swallowed them whole. But Elliot knew they'd be back. That night. Jamie snuck out again. The boy had a flashlight tucked into his hoodie pocket and a thermos of hot soup sloshing in his backpack. He moved silently along the fence line, just like he had dozens of times before. But tonight, Boone was already waiting. The gorilla was standing, not seated, and when Jamie approached, he motioned, clear, decisive, toward the woods. Jamie paused. "You want me to follow?" Boone didn't respond. He just turned and began walking toward the back gate, inside the farmhouse. Elliot sat by the front window with the lights off, shotgun across his lap. He hadn't dozed, not once. His joints ached, but the fear kept him upright every few minutes. He checked the barn with binoculars. At 9:42 p.m., the power went out. Not just the house, the barn, the whole property. Elliot stood, God help us. From the field came a crash, the sound of chain-link fence being ripped open. Flashlights danced in the darkness. Shadows moved like wolves through the trees. 3 figures, 4, all dressed in black. Masks pulled high, silencers glinting under the pale moonlight. Not wildlife officers, not lawmen, operatives. Elliot didn't hesitate. He stepped out onto the porch and fired a warning shot into the air. The blast echoed like thunder. One of the intruders ducked. Another returned fire, a silenced hiss that struck the porch beam inches from Elliot's shoulder. He rolled behind the post, breathing hard, and chambered another round in the chaos. Boone led Jamie through a narrow path behind the barn, a trail almost invisible under the pines. It was an old hunting trail Elliot hadn't used in years, but Boone had seen him walk it once and remembered. They moved quickly, Boone low to the ground, Jamie clinging to his arm. The path wound steeply upward, past boulders and fallen logs, until it opened onto a hidden bluff that overlooked the valley. Boone stopped, listening, before pushing deeper into the trees. Back at the farm, Elliot made his stand. He fired again, this time into the dirt near the feet of the broad-shouldered man as he crossed the yard. "You come any closer, you'll be eating lead with your teeth." The man didn't flinch, but then a voice from the dark, low, calm, female, cut through the noise. "That won't be necessary." A new figure stepped into view. Dr. Evelyn Maddox, late 40s, dressed in a long black coat, her dark hair tied back in a sharp ponytail. She had piercing green eyes and a voice like velvet wrapped around steel. She had once been Highmore's public ethics liaison, a role that masked her true purpose. "Suppression, Elliot," she said smoothly. "You don't know what you're protecting." "I know enough," he said, "and I know who you are." She smiled, like a teacher indulging a child. "Then you know this ends one way, maybe, but not tonight," behind her. Boone's paintings were burning. They had set fire to the barn. Elliot's voice cracked with rage. "You cowards!" Maddox turned, surprised. But Elliot was already gone, back into the house, where he grabbed the fire extinguisher and sprinted toward the blaze. By the time the fire was under control, Boone and Jamie were halfway up the ridge. The sun had barely risen when Boone and Jamie reached the outskirts of Asheville. The long night in the forest had left them coated in mud and dried pine needles. Jamie's hoodie torn at the shoulder, and Boone's knuckles caked in earth from having cleared fallen logs and brambles to make a path. But they were alive, and more than that, they had a direction. At the edge of town, tucked between a winding road and a shallow creek, stood the Chestnut Ridge Wildlife Rescue Center, a modest sanctuary with cedar-paneled buildings and overgrown gardens. It looked more like a reclusive artist's retreat than a facility of science. This was the home of Dr. Lena Moore, Elliot's old colleague and once one of the nation's most promising primate cognition researchers. Lena, now in her late 50s, had the build of a ballet instructor, slim, upright, with a precision to her every movement. Her short, silver hair framed a strong face, angular and marked by faint sunspots. Years spent under grant committee lights and outdoor enclosures had given her skin a certain texture, weathered, but confident. She wore denim overalls over a black thermal shirt, and her boots were muddy from the morning's feeding rounds. Lena had always believed that science wasn't meant for towers. It belonged in the dirt, with the animals. When Boone emerged from the tree line at dawn, Jamie limping behind, Lena had been checking on a fox with a fractured leg. She turned at the sound of rustling and dropped the feed bucket mid-step. She didn't run, she didn't scream, she froze, eyes locked on the enormous gorilla who, remarkably, stood still in the dewy field, head bowed, like a monk at a temple gate. Jamie stepped forward, bruised and panting. "Are you Dr. Lena Moore?" "I am," she said slowly, her voice as clear as ice water. "I'm Jamie," the boy said. "Boone needs help. Elliot sent us." Her breath caught at the name. "Elliot's alive." He stayed to hold them off. They set his barn on fire. Lena moved fast. Within minutes, Boone was inside the rescue center's largest reinforced enclosure, though he never tried to leave. Jamie, wrapped in a wool blanket and sipping cocoa, explained everything: the hidden documents, the video, the attack, the old hunting path. Lena listened without a word, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. When Jamie handed over the flash drive that Elliot had slipped him before they escaped, one Elliot had said was from Charlie but hadn't dared open. Lena plugged it in. On screen, time-stamped security footage began to play. The date: 11 years ago, the location: Highmore Institute, Sub-Level C. A sterile lab, 4 handlers in white suits, a steel enclosure. Inside, Boone, smaller, younger, wild-eyed, was strapped to a platform. Electrodes ran across his skull. A man in a gray lab coat, tall, wiry, and unmistakably Dr. Evelyn Maddox, leaned over the controls, nodding coldly. Then it happened. Boone writhed. Maddox pressed something on a remote. Boone screamed, raw, primal, human-like, and the room went white with sparks. The footage ended in static. Lena's hands trembled. She opened a second file, Jamie's footage of Boone painting, downloaded before he deleted it from the internet. She stared at it for a long time. Then she rose from her desk and called someone. Not the police, the press. By noon, 3 news vans had parked outside the sanctuary. At first, Boone stayed back, inside the enclosure. But when Jamie stepped beside the fence and held up one of the paintings, spirals and blue eyes on a cracked canvas, Boone moved closer. Cameron Ortiz, the lead reporter from WNCN Charlotte, arrived in a tan trench coat and polished boots unsuited for muddy fields, in his 40s, with a radio voice and a silver-streaked beard. Ortiz was known for taking human interest stories and turning them into national headlines, but when he saw Boone, he didn't speak, he just lowered his camera and stared. The broadcast went live 2 hours later. Headline: "The Gorilla Who Paints and the Secrets He Survived Within a Day." It spread. Lena released the full footage, along with documentation from Elliot and a sworn statement from Jamie. Protests broke out near what remained of the Highmore compound. Congress members called for investigations. A federal oversight committee announced an emergency hearing into the Highmore files. Evelyn Maddox disappeared. Boone was placed under federal wildlife protection. But he never had to leave, with Lena's help. Chestnut Ridge was reclassified as a national sanctuary. Boone was granted permanent residence, no more cages. His enclosure became a sprawling open habitat at the foot of the mountain, with trees, art supplies, and a modest observation post where visitors by appointment could quietly observe without disrupting his peace. A week later, Elliot arrived in Asheville, bruised, limping, with singed eyebrows and bandaged fingers. He was driven up by Officer Linda Poe, a no-nonsense deputy sheriff from Blue Ridge, in her 50s, with dark skin, tight curls under her hat, and a deep mistrust for authority since the county budget cuts slashed her patrol funding. Linda had found Elliot wandering near the river the morning after the attack. "You owe me gas money," she muttered as she helped him out of the car. Boone was in the field when Elliot walked up. The old gorilla turned slowly. They stared at each other across the clearing. Then Boone approached and, without being asked, raised his hand. "Thank you," he signed. Elliot's eyes welled. He raised his hand, shakily, and signed back. Home. Jamie came to visit every Saturday. Lena let him clean out water buckets, catalog Boone's paintings, and help feed the owls. She called him her smallest staff member and had a name tag made just for him: Junior Wildlife Steward. He never missed a weekend. Boone became more than a symbol. He became a voice. His story was studied in classrooms, his paintings displayed in rotating museum exhibits across the country. But he didn't seem to care about the attention. He painted, he walked, and when Jamie sat outside the fence, Boone still came to listen. The press eventually moved on. Highmore's funding was frozen. Arrests were made. Maddox, months later, was found hiding in Nevada under a false identity. She was charged and sentenced, but Boone never spoke of it. He simply continued to live, quietly, beneath the canopy of trees, as if the silence was the only part he could truly call his own. People began to call him by a new name, the gorilla who survived the silence. Sometimes, what the world throws away is what God chooses to redeem. Boone was never just an animal. He was a silent witness, a creature broken by the hands of man, yet healed through quiet love, friendship, and the grace of second chances. His journey reminds us that miracles do not always roar. Sometimes they walk on two knuckles, paint in silence, and wait patiently for someone to see their worth. In our daily lives, we often overlook the quiet souls, the outcasts, the voiceless, the forgotten. But it is in those very lives that God often plants the seeds of something extraordinary. Boone's story is not just about survival, but about purpose, about how love, truth, and faith can change the course of even the most hidden life. So today, May we open our eyes to the boons around us. May we listen deeper. May we protect what is innocent and speak up when others stay silent. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person to say no to darkness and yes to something greater. If this story moved your heart, please share it. Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe to this channel and let others know that hope is real, and if you believe, like we do, that God still works through the quiet and the broken, comment Amen to show you're standing with us. May the Lord bless you and keep you safe.